Let's wade into the squishy, squirmy world of fat. And not just any fat, but old, cranky, metabolically disruptive fat. The kind that doesn't just sit quietly under your skin but starts picking fights with your pancreas, hormones, and cardiovascular system. Welcome to the world of senescent adipocytes, where even your fat cells decide they're done being helpful and start acting like tiny pro-inflammatory megaphones. And the plot twist? Not all fat is created equal, and neither is all old fat. We've long known that obesity and metabolic syndrome aren't just about how much fat you carry, but where it's stored and what that fat is doing behind the scenes. Some adipose tissue is relatively benign, like subcutaneous fat that pads your hips. Other fat, especially visceral fat that hugs your organs like a toxic blanket, is much more sinister. But now researchers are digging even deeper, asking whether certain subtypes of fat cells, particularly those that have entered senescence, are driving much of the chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, and metabolic dysfunction we see in conditions like type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, and cardiovascular disease. Here's the basic idea. Fat cells, or adipocytes, aren't immortal. They grow, shrink, and sometimes die. But under chronic stress, too much food, too little oxygen, high insulin levels, some of these cells enter a senescent state. That means they stop dividing, lose metabolic flexibility, and start spitting out inflammatory signals like IL-6, TNF-alpha, and MCP-1. This is the infamous SASP, senescence-associated secretory phenotype, which acts like a distress signal that never turns off. Imagine a retired fat cell putting up a neon, "I'm angry and everything hurts" sign, and then convincing all its neighbors to do the same. Now, here's where it gets spicy. Not all senescent adipocytes are equal troublemakers. There's growing evidence that some may just sit there doing nothing particularly harmful. Others, however, seem to specialize in fueling systemic chaos. These bad actors might be more prevalent in visceral fat depots, particularly in the omentum or perirenal regions, and their molecular fingerprints suggest a higher level of metabolic disruption. They may be especially adept at recruiting immune cells like macrophages, turning your fat into a low-grade war zone where cytokines fly and insulin signaling dies. Even more fascinating is the suggestion that adipocyte origin matters. Some fat cells are born from different progenitor pools, and those lineages might be more prone to senescence under stress. For instance, certain developmental subtypes of white adipose tissue may be more inflammatory when senescent, while others may just become inert blobs. Brown and beige fat, which normally help burn energy, also appear more resistant to senescence, but might undergo dysfunction in more subtle ways, like failing to properly generate heat or utilize fatty acids. Enter the tech cavalry. Machine learning, single-cell RNA sequencing, and spatial transcriptomics are now being used to classify senescent adipocyte subtypes with disturbing precision. These tools can distinguish fat cells based on their inflammatory profiles, metabolic flexibility, and responsiveness to hormonal cues. They can even detect how close they are to blood vessels, nerves, or immune cells, helping scientists figure out which senescent fat cells are pulling the biggest strings in metabolic disease. And what does all this mean for metabolic syndrome? A lot. Because it suggests we might not need to shrink all fat to reverse disease, just the toxic subtypes. This could lead to senolytic therapies designed specifically for adipose tissue, drugs that seek and destroy only the most dangerous senescent adipocytes, leaving the less harmful ones, or the regenerative precursors, intact. Think of it as cellular precision liposuction, with the added bonus of lowering your blood sugar. It also redefines how we view weight loss. Traditional approaches aim to reduce overall fat mass, but they may not touch the senescent cell load. In fact, some senescent adipocytes are resistant to lipolysis, meaning they stick around even when you lose weight, kind of like party guests who won't leave even after you turn off the music and start vacuuming. Targeting them specifically could help explain why some people don't see full metabolic recovery after dieting or surgery unless the underlying inflammation is addressed. And yes, lifestyle still matters. Caloric overload, sedentary behavior, and chronic stress all contribute to the development of senescent fat. But so do genetics and early life exposures. Some people may be predisposed to developing high-risk adipocyte populations that go senescent faster or become more inflammatory under pressure. In the future, we might be able to screen for these subtypes with a quick scan or biopsy and personalized treatments based on your unique fat fingerprint. Personalized medicine, but make it squishy. In conclusion, your fat isn't just fat. It's a diverse, dynamic ecosystem, and like any ecosystem, it has invasive species. Senescent adipocytes, especially certain nasty subtypes, may be the metabolic equivalent of kudzu. Hard to get rid of, quietly strangling everything around them, and highly responsive to environmental stress. But with the right tools, AI, cell profiling, targeted therapeutics, we may finally be able to prune the worst offenders and let the rest of the system thrive. Who knew fighting metabolic disease might start with listening to the whispers of cranky, elderly fat cells?